Yes, I want to thank you, Regina Ress, so much for joining us. It's very kind of you, all the way from New Mexico. Please please tell everyone about your work and please tell us a story.
Well, thank you, Eric. It's really great to be here. And I see some very familiar faces, some that I met in Chennai in 2017. And someone's on here that I've known since I was probably 5 years old and haven't seen in years, but he's here too. So it's great. What a great thing Zoom is. It connects us all. So I was fortunate. Oh, and I don't have a tree. I don't have a tree. Had I known this was going to be, I would have had a tree story, but whatever. I was very fortunate to find storytelling after a long sojourn in theater. And while I still do that, story's been my primary and major focus for many years. And Diane Wolkstein, some of you know her, she invited me into the storytelling world. And ever since then, I've been telling stories in places as wildly different as major museums in various places, which is good fun in front of the collection of the culture that I'm telling the stories from, festivals, but also women's prisons and wildly careening bus in New Mexico. I was in a festival and they put us in teams on buses and Mexican buses, and we were jumping up and telling stories. That was great. So in 2004, I was in a festival on the island of Tenerife, which is off of the coast of Africa. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd do that. There I was, and I met a Brazilian author, Marina Colasanti, and she's a major journalist and author in Brazil. She gave me a book. It was in Spanish. I don't know what she originally wrote it in because she was Italian and then Brazilian and spoke English. But it was in Spanish. So she said, take this, translate it. So that's the story that I've brought to you today. It's a story called The Young Weaver. And I think that we'll recognize some folkloric themes in it, but it's from her book, The Young Weaver. Though it was still dark, she got up, as if awakened by the sound of the sun, tiptoeing up to the borders of the night. And quickly, she sat down at her loom. Translucent threads to create the day. To weave daybreak, she chose pastels, and she sent the shuttle across the tapestry, creating dawn just as outside her window, the clear light of morning drew the horizon. Next, she chose fine yarn drenched with color, which she wove back and forth, hour after hour on a large tapestry that never ended. If the sun became too strong and the petals of the flowers in the garden drooped, the young woman threaded her shuttle with thick, fluffy gray thread. And then in the shadows brought by the clouds, with silver thread, she embossed tiny dots on her tapestry, and light rain tapped at her window. Oh, but if too many cold and windy days passed, and buffeted the leaves and frightened the birds, the young woman needed only to weave beautiful golden threads into her fabric, summoning the sun to calm nature. And so, working the shuttle from one side to the other and moving the great petals of the loom back and forth, the young woman passed her days. Nothing was lacking. If she felt hungry, she wove a beautiful fish, taking great care with the scales, and with the result that on her table appeared a plate of fish, ready for supper. If she were thirsty, she would entwine soft yarn the color of milk in her tapestry. And at night, after weaving in some dark thread, She slept serenely. And so she lived. Weaving was all she did. Weaving was all she desired. And weaving and weaving, weaving and weaving, always alone, she wove her own loneliness. But one day, as she sat at her loom, she thought it might be good to have a companion. She didn't even wait till the next day. On a whim, without thinking too clearly, she began to entwine in the tapestry the wool, the colors that would give her a mate. And little by little, her wish appeared. A plumed hat, a bearded face, a nonchalant body, and well-polished shoes. And it was just as she finished putting in the last thread in the point of the shoes when they called at the door. That closed door didn't stop him. No, that young man put his hand on the doorknob, took off his plumed hat, and entered her life. And that night, leaning on his shoulder, she thought about the beautiful children she would weave to bring her even more joy. And she was happy. She was happy for a while. But if the man had thought about children, he soon forgot about them. Once he discovered the power of her weaving, he thought of nothing save all the things her weaving could give him. We must have a better house, he told her, and more now so that we are two. He demanded that she choose the most beautiful brick-colored wool, green threads for the door frames, and that she finish it quickly. But once the house was ready, it didn't seem sufficient. Why have a house if we can have a palace? He asked. Without waiting for a reply, he ordered that the palace be made of stone with finishing touches of silver. And days and weeks and months, days and days, weeks and months. That young weaver worked weaving roofs and doors and courtyards and stairs and salons and wells. And the snow fell outside, but she didn't have time to summon the sun. And night arrived, but she didn't have time to finish the day. She wove and she wove and she grew sadder and sadder. But that did not stop her from moving the combs, which accompanied the rhythm of the shuttle. She wove, and finally the palace was ready. And from among the many rooms, her husband chose for her and her loom the highest room in the highest tower. Storytellers, do we know this theme? It is to ensure that no one takes the tapestry, he said. And before closing the door and locking it, he ordered, "It lacks stables, and don't forget the horses." Without rest, the young woman wove the whims of her husband, filling the palace with luxuries and the coffers with coins, the rooms with servants. Weaving was all she did. Weaving was all she desired. And weaving, she wove her own sadness, a sorrow that felt bigger than the palace itself, with all of its treasures. And for the first time, she thought it might be better to be alone. Alone. And alone, she waited for nightfall. She waited for nightfall, and then she got up while her husband slept, dreaming of new riches. Barefoot, to make no noise, she climbed the long stairs to the tower, and she sat down at her loom. This time, she didn't need to look for thread. She took hold of that shuttle, and she moved it in reverse, and sending it quickly from one side to the other, she began to take apart the weaving. She unraveled the horses. She unraveled the carriages. She unraveled the stables and the gardens. And afterwards, she unraveled the servants and the palace and all the marvels that it contained. And once again, she found herself in her small house. And she smiled toward the garden outside her window. And that night ended when her husband, wondering at the hardness of the bed, awoke, and terrified, he looked around him. He had no time to get up. She'd already unraveled the dark design of his shoes, and he, surprised, then watched his feet disappear and his legs fade away. He couldn't get up. He couldn't raise that nonchalant body or that bearded face. She unraveled that man, plumed hat and all. And then, as though she heard the arrival of the sun, the young woman chose a translucent thread, clear, fine, and passing it carefully between the long threads of the tapestry, she created, once again, the line of the sky traced by the light. The Young Weaver by Marina Colasanti. So I just want to say that, and thank you all for listening. I think it's an amazing little story. It's a nice flip on a lot of things that we've heard before. I just want to tell you that I chose it because, and I haven't told it in years and years. Quite frankly, I'd kind of forgotten. It got lost in other things I was doing. Next week, I'm giving a workshop for the festival here, and it's called Captured by the Troll. And it's on a related topic. Now, it's not exactly the same, but we're all captured by trolls, whether or not we're married to them. It can be a boss, it can be any number of things. So I thought, oh, this is kind of an interesting companion piece to what we'll look at. We're just going to look at an old Grimm's tale, and I'm a metaphor freak, so we'll look at some of the metaphors and maybe find some seeds for personal stories. So that's next Friday. So any
I have to say, I have to say, when the husband got to watch himself unravel was the funniest moment for me. It just was like, I mean, because, well, we all know what he was, but just that he got that image just stuck with me. My feet are going, what's going on, whatever. That was fun. And I did, it resonated with me very much, that story of where the man catches a fish and the fish, and he throws it back in because it was a talking fish, and he comes back and his wife says, oh, I got it, the house changed, it's nicer. And then he wants everything, and they end that back, it's like, what is really valuable, right? So it's got a lot of value. And I like the reverse that she unraveled him.
She unraveled that man, plumed hat and all. I've seen that the fisherman's wife story, but the version that I've seen, she's the one demanding more and more and more and more.
Oh, no, she is. The husband comes back. The fish was nice enough. He said, what would you like? And he said, oh, well, if I could have a little bit bigger house, that would be nice. And then he goes back. His wife is so surprised, but then she hears about the fish, go back and get more, right?
Yeah, right. So, and I never told that story because I was annoyed, because in so many stories that I've heard, the folk tales, it's the woman demanding things. And this one is the jerk.
The two things I like about this story especially is, yes, it's role reversal, but it's also be careful for what you wish for. That guy, without really thinking about it, she thought loneliness was bad, right? She wasn't valuing her time, her control of her own life and everything. She was looking outside for an answer. And sometimes when you look outside, what you get is not the answer, but a bigger problem, right? So.
Yes, indeedy. Anybody else have a comment or a question?
What did you
Hi,
mean?
I'm sorry. I just saw my friend Lucinda. Hi, Lucinda. Yes, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Lucinda, did you want to say something? No. Regina, what did you mean the story is a flip on a popular idea?
That role reversal, because I've seen so many versions where it's the woman who's greedy, and I always found it sort of tiresome and refused to tell those stories. And this one is just such, it is the role reversal. And so there's a lot of things. There are a lot of folkloric elements in this. Of course, this woman knows what she's doing. So the tower, and in the book she wrote, she didn't have storytellers. We know this theme, but that tower thing, put her in the tower, lock her in, and tell her to weave. That's in some stories we know. So, but yeah, the flip of the husband. And another thing that I adore is, of course, she's weaving reality. She's weaving her own life and weaving everything so beautiful. And I've been, for the last 10 years, involved with making films about domestic violence. Mainly because of the prison work. Working in women's prisons, you find that about 75–80% of women in jails have been abused. So, there's this moment, and I remember working with the Grimm's tale that I'm going to use next week, where I was working with formerly incarcerated women. And I said, what took her so long to get out of this situation in the Grimm's tale? And they said, you can't get out until you reach rock bottom. So she did it all. She did it all. And then finally she said, basta, enough. And changed the reality. So I like that.
I always love the way you tell your stories, lots of life, and the small little nuances that you bring about, the small little expressions, thoroughly love them. For me, something more that I take from the story is, I don't think it was anything bad or negative that the situation that she got herself into. For me, it was more like an experience. She learned she needed to, and that was the path to that learning. So I don't necessarily see it as a negativity or anything wrong. Yes, she thought she's alone. She tried exploring having company. The company did not turn out well. She was clever enough to find a way out. That's how I see it. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Could I say
Hi.
a word?
Oh, Jim Levinson. Hi.
Could I say a word? I'm the one that was with Regina up until she was 5 years old.
Since she was 5. Yeah.
Since she was 5, she is a wonderful human being. And I have to tell you that one of the things we used to do was go over to her house and sled ride down the hill next to her house. Wonderful, wonderful memories, and a wonderful human being. Let me say also that one of my favorite cities in the world is Chennai. And I would like to then say, Vainakam Sokyama to my friends, and very briefly say, Kondenenum peeril katel kunden kandemena manetil pandeteti I kondenenum peeril katel kunden na. And just one more thing, because Regina has done this prison ministry, which I have also had the opportunity to do. An alternative ending just came into my mind as she was saying that, and see what you think of this. So the young husband, rather than simply unraveling, our young woman heroine weaves into his story something else. Some refugee children, some starving people from Afghanistan, some grieving widows and orphans, and, as Regina was saying, some victims of domestic violence. And this this man who's about to be unraveled who might have been unraveled, looks around and says, I got it wrong. I have to change my life. So see what you think of that.
Well, all right. That's a whole other story, and we could take it there. I mean, that would be something to play with. The thing about these wonderful folktales is malleable, malleable. And all right, so how do we change that ending? How do we change that ending? And that's always a good thing. And Jim, by the way, is in the eastern United States, in the state of Vermont. So I'm in the Southwest. He is in Vermont.
Hi, Regina.
Hi.
Good journey here. I just
Hi.
I always love your telling, because the way you start itself is like just the theater speaks from you, and yeah. And in this story, love the way you brought that girl weaving. It's as if she has full control over her own destiny. She is weaving, she is undoing it. Again, she is doing full control, empowerment. It is something she tolerated to some extent. It's not that she immediately undid it, but after a point, she said no. So beautiful.
No, thank you. Thank you. I love this story. I may have to start telling it. Where can I tell it? Anybody else? It's good to see a lot of, a lot of you I met in Chennai back in 2017.
Yeah.
Zoom is such a trip.
Okay, thank you so much, Regina.
You're welcome.
It's really wonderful to see you at the height of your powers.
Oh, Eric, thank you. And you're just, 10 million emails from Eric explaining how to get into this Zoom call. Thank you for that. Because I'm going, how do I get there? And then I went, wait, Eric keeps sending me that. Don't forget, here's the link. Your powers of organization are, you're at the height of your powers. And I suggest you take a vacation after this.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, we'll stop recording.